This is the Pro Perspective from House Pro, where home builders, designers, and industry experts share their views on running a modern firm.
Welcome, everybody. In this episode, we are talking to Allison Iantosca, president and owner of F.H. Perry Builder, and also the author of Leading with Heart, a book that is a reflection on leadership, client relationships, and it's really meant to inspire folks in our industry and beyond our industry. And I'm excited to be able to share Allison's wit and wisdom with our listeners today, where we cover everything from being an authentic leader to applying the concept of ROI to meetings. I know you're probably surprised we're talking about meetings, but we are going to talk about meetings and so much more. So welcome, Allison.
Hi, Eliza. It's so great to be in this conversation with you.
So excited to do this and so much to talk about. So before we jump into it, can you share with everybody a bit about your background and what led you to write Leading with Heart?
Sure. So I'm in my 25th year at F.H. Perry Builder. I started in 2000. I always joke that I'm still on the 6-month maybe plan 25 years later. Didn't know that this was going to be the path that I was going to take, and have really learned that what I care about so much is leading the business. I don't have a huge background in construction or project management or anything like that, but I've really learned how to surround myself with people who love that stuff and know how to do it at their best. And so what I can do is create an environment in which they can thrive. And part of that was recognizing that I wasn't probably going to be the best person to be in charge of marketing along the line. And so I started to pen some newsletters as a way of just keeping in touch with the different people that we would want to have know that we're here and we're ready to go. Not thinking much of that either, just sort of doing something that seemed kind of natural and something that I might like to do. And I got really good feedback on it, so I kept at it. And at one point I had a whole bunch of newsletters written, and I think I thought I would just put it together for my kids, just let's put it in go to Staples and get the spiral bound notebooks and bind it up. And then I bumped into somebody who said, you could turn this into a book. And I thought, oh, I could. And then I found someone who said, well, you could turn it into more of a leadership story and a leadership book and something that ties to your values. So it ended up becoming a thing. And I just love having it. And it tells a lot about how we think about things at F.H. Perry Builder and a little bit about the journey that I've taken.
I love that this is a leadership book, but it's a different approach to a leadership book. And I have to say, I found the writing delightful and unusual for, something that's quote unquote a business book. You mentioned you don't have the typical background, even though, was a family business or is a family business and you took over from your father, but you have a different background. You have a background in the arts. And I'm wondering, I'd love to hear just a little bit about how that has kind of played a role in your leadership style and maybe in your writing style as well.
Yeah, interesting. So I did spend my high school career in a performing arts high school here in Massachusetts called Walnut Hills School for the Arts. I was a theater major, acting major. I think a couple of things that stay with me. One, I was surrounded by creative people who were very passionate about what they were doing, which meant that they studied it and learned it and talked about it and shared it. And those were the things that we discussed over lunch. Those were the things that we focused on at study hall. You couldn't walk anywhere on campus without hearing music, without going to some senior recital where somebody was singing. You were constantly hearing stories, seeing performances, kind of being inspired from a very different point of view, I think. I mean, like brain-heart connection, brain-body connection. So I hadn't really thought about it until you just asked that, but I can see how that was such a foundational part of how I spent my time, that it probably fused into my body and in my experience. So maybe I'm tapping onto that. And being in an academic environment that also supports the arts, that crossover, that intentionality of how do these things tie together was definitely a part of my academic training too, growing up. So there was that, and then the sort of dedication right out of the gate. I mean, what is it to be 15, 16, 17 and having to stand up and do a monologue to get a part? What is it to have to present a scene to get a grade? I feel like those were really foundational times for me as well, of how do I use myself, my creativity, my expression as a way of creating a pathway. And so I, again, hadn't thought about it, but now that I tie those things together, maybe they did lead to something more natural or more in me than I had realized.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was a rhetoric major in college, and it's really all about audience analysis, right? And what is the impact of this communication on who you're speaking to, and how are you crafting it? And so I'm sure that there's a lot of method, or right, kind of very purposeful thinking when you're in an acting right role, thinking about what impact you're having on the audience or the folks that are receiving your message. And I can imagine that that has been helpful in a leadership role as you think about, structuring those communications and how they're going to be, what impact you're making physically with your words, right? All of those pieces come into play.
Yeah, 100%. I've actually, what I found so powerful in the leadership training I've done is a real focus on use of self, which is another way of saying what you just said. You do have to think about what you're doing with your voice. How is it coming across? What are you doing with your body? What are your gestures? How are you giving silence space? How are you giving words space? So all of those things were definitely a part of my early training and maybe have shown up to play a role in my professional career.
Super interesting. When I think about communications, there's, kind of your side of it, what's in your head and what you're trying to get across. And then there's the recipient side of this. So when you think about, empathy and emotional intelligence and leadership, and kind of thinking about the interplay of those two things in people, I guess, how do you think about, self-empathy versus having empathy for others, and how that impacts, relationships and communication?
Yeah, that's a big question. But one I think about all the time. And I think the empathy part, the mostly what I want to find a way to allow for is that the things we get most stumped by, if you sort of pay attention to where people get stumped most of the time, is something that they're afraid of or worried about. And so when I feel like if we can learn both with ourselves and with others to see that gap of when we get triggered by fear or concern and what our reaction is, we can help ourselves to have, if we can douse a little empathy right there in that gap, what the reaction is can shift. And it has such a host of possibility in it and can create such a different fallout or a different chain reaction from there. So two things. One, if you can catch that for yourself, you can create a different possibility. And if you allow for it for somebody else, like, I noticed that this just triggered you. I heard what you said, but I want to go back to what the impact on you was. Can we go back to that? Can I have some empathy for what showed up for you at that moment? We can begin to change how dialogue happens, or begin to change how we work together towards this shared goal that we have. And this makes it sound very calculated, or makes it sound, I get a lot of, oh, that's very touchy-feely. It is, but touchy-feely has also got strategy to it, because you can't move something that's frozen in place by fear or worry. If you can have some empathy and you can have some emotional, I'm pausing to say emotional intelligence because it's got such a buzz to it. It's just that emotional moment where you're like, oh, something is happening here besides our dialogue. Something is happening here besides the logic. Something is happening here besides the thing that we're trying to get to. It's a signal that there's something else to pay attention to, and that maybe if you pay attention to that, either again for yourself or for the other person, you can move things in a different direction. You can create range of possibility. So that's why I like to think about it, and why I think it's so important to be aware of.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it's a useful tool for uncovering underlying issues or concerns, right, that you just may be unaware of, right, that this person may be bringing to the conversation and have in their head for this conversation. So even though it sounds touchy-feely, you could think about it logically, like, I don't have full information. Like, maybe
Sure.
logically, I'm having this conversation, I see the person I'm speaking with react, physically or verbally in a way that is surprising or, not positively. And there must be something I don't know.
I love that you say that, because how often is it that you're talking about something that isn't the thing that you should be talking about? And that, you're dug in one way or the other around a truth that isn't actually what's going on for either you or for the other person. So if you're feeling anxiety or nervousness about talking to somebody who you may admire or you think of as a superior or someone that you don't like, you're dealing with all of that stuff while you think you're dealing with whatever it is that you're talking about. How do we pay attention to the fact that there's anxiety present at the same time as we're trying to move a change order through? If we can pause long enough to acknowledge that there's some anxiety, whether it's out loud or not, but even just to yourself, like, I'm about to go into this meeting, I have to present a really big change order. How can I get support for my anxiety and not just shove it to the side so that I can be successful in my presentation? So I can think about some tips or tricks or get rid of it before by calling somebody on the team or calling a friend and just saying, oh my gosh, this is what I'm about to do. Understanding where our strengths and weaknesses are so that we can support ourselves to be at our best. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think manhandling our emotions gets any brownie points. I think actually connecting with them and understanding how they get in our way or how they help us, that's where you get strength and capability.
So interesting. And you mentioned some of the things that you do for yourself. What other tips or examples do you have for folks for dealing with their own anxiety and emotions?
Such a great question. There are so many different things. So here's the thing. Gather ideas from others, but trust that you'll know it when you find your own thing. So journaling is something that people like to talk about. Some people don't like journaling at all. It doesn't help them. It raises their anxiety because suddenly they're taking everything that's in their head and putting it on a piece of paper. But try it and see if that becomes your thing. Or walking can be a meditation. You don't have to sit on a cushion with your fingertips touching to find your center. Some people find beauty in Manhattan and the busiest street in the city. Others find beauty out in the woods. It's, to me, what I've had to learn and discover is what is it that works for you, that gets you closest to your center, closest to your willingness to care for yourself, closest to your own truest way of being. There is a meditation I like very much that talks about when you're at your fullest self, it's like the blue sky. The blue sky has clouds and rainbows and hurricanes and sunshine in it all the time. But those are the thoughts, the ideas, the habits that we have. Where is the space you can find to just say, I'm always the blue sky, whatever comes in or out doesn't have to impact me. That place, however you find that place and believe in it enough for yourself.
So I know you do a lot of coaching, and coaching kind of plays a big role in what you do with others. Can you talk a little bit about how you coach others along these lines? So if they're, seeing that type of anxiety in someone else, how do you get it out there so that the information is out there and dealt with, especially if it's something that is clearly uncomfortable
Yeah.
for both people?
So when I'm coaching and when you think about going to coaching, I think a lot of times people assume that it's about changing, which it is. And a lot of times here in coaching sessions, I'm doing this, but I should do this. I should be less anxious. I should use my voice more. I should talk more in meetings. And the very first thing I want to know is, what are you doing instead of? What is it that you're doing instead of talking in meetings? What is it you're doing instead of not being anxious? How are you helping yourself? What begins to happen is that you can appreciate that the behavior that you have is supporting you somehow, or else you wouldn't do it.
Mhm.
We don't do things that don't have value to us. We just don't, right? So you think about, why is this behavior showing up? Well, it's a habit. I don't want this habit anymore. Okay, but before we toss it out the window, do you know how helpful that habit is to you? Do you know that not everybody can do that? Can you imagine a time when you would never ever want to have that habit and never ever want to be able to do it? Never ever want to be able to be quiet in a meeting? Never ever want to have anxiety? So you begin to appreciate who you are and what you have, and not ask it to get tossed out, but actually say, hang out here, but let's see what else we've got. And so then you begin to create some range around what is possible for you to do in different situations, so that you can make a choice about whether you're going to stay quiet right now or not. So it builds muscle around this sort of optimism that what you're doing is actually helping you. It's a little bit of it's a little mind warp to think about, but I guarantee that when we come to ourselves or to another from a place of, I see you and I think you're doing everything you can with what you've got, it shifts how people begin to do work with themselves and on themselves. And it's super powerful.
So it sounds like a lot of it is just a different level of self-awareness. So, yes, I typically, do X, but if I'm starting to be more aware that I do that because of Y, then I can start to make conscious choices about whether I want to change that behavior or
Yeah.
not, or when I want to change that behavior.
Yes. And then you notice that you get that trigger that elicits the habitual behavior, and you get to say, hang on, do I want to go in that direction this time? It might be a good direction, but I want to make a choice about going in that direction. Or do I want to do something else that I've learned?
No, it could really be a confidence builder,
Right.
and just to have that self-awareness. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about meetings, because I feel like it's an unusual topic to have these conversations, and because I know it's such a pain point for so many people, whether you're owning a meeting and you're in a leadership position, or whether you're attending a meeting, right? Most people are frustrated by the majority of meetings that they participate in, right? Whether they feel like it's not a good use of time, or the outcome, right, didn't move things forward, or right, they're unclear about why they're there for the meeting. I mean, there's so many reasons that, or there's so many people in a meeting, right? Like, what's the right size for a meeting? There's so many things that impact whether people are happy with meetings, or like, did I miss out, right? Do I need to be in these meetings just to be in the know? There's a lot of anxiety around meetings. And I know you said that the hardest part of your job, but also your secret sauce. So maybe tell us a little about why that is.
Yeah. Well, I love this topic, and I think a lot about it. I know there are a lot of meeting gurus out there that say how long a meeting should be, or how many topics you should cover, or it should be a standing meeting versus a sitting meeting. I've never really diagnosed or analyzed meetings from that point of view, but I do think there are things to pay attention to that make meetings good. And the first thing is to understand that calling the meeting is not enough. And I think that's where people get stuck. We think we have something we need to talk about. We put the key people who need to talk about it in the room. Oh, yes, that person probably needs to come too because it impacts them, or somehow they might have something to add. They go into the meeting and they start almost as if they've begun the conversation. So you're already halfway into the topic before the meeting has begun. You think you're going to get an outcome. The trouble is, there's so much more happening in the meeting than just the agenda the people that are at the table and getting to the outcome that you hope that you're going to get to. So I just think it's I don't know how I got to this place where I think it's such a blast to kind of geek out about how to make a really world-class meeting. But I think if you can pay attention to, there's so many different things, and we can talk about some of the key pieces, but the awareness of where people are in their heads as they're coming in, what do they need to leave outside the room? What are the dynamics? How do we manage and adjust? Meeting leadership is really important to the success of a meeting, both for you as the meeting leader and for the participants.
So that is, again, I think kind of like we talked about your approach, and with acting, it's a very purposeful, thoughtful, conscious meeting style, right? Which again, I think isn't very typical. So again, maybe your background impacts your feelings about meetings as well. But maybe talk a little bit about what are those pieces, and what kind of preparation do you do, and what's reasonable? So, I think probably a lot of people are thinking, God, how much time am I going to have to put in even before the meeting to make sure that this meeting is productive? And then do I have the same expectations for my team members? If they're going to call a meeting, what kind of expectations do I set on how they're preparing for it? And how do I know that they've done the work to make this meeting successful? So I'd love to hear kind of what you do, and how you set a model for your team.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it's a little bit like, if you just go to the driving range and swing a golf club, you hit the ball really far because you're not thinking about it too much. And then once someone says, hold it this way or move your hips this way, you suddenly can't hit the ball. And when you were just saying that, I want to be really clear. What I'm not talking about adding more layers of work to what you're doing in order to have a successful meeting. I'm more saying there are some key things that are pretty important, whether it's a 5-minute meeting or an hour and a half that you're trying to get something to happen. The things that stand out most to me are pretty simple. One is you need to build trust immediately. People need to feel glad that they're there and trust that you're going to be able to run an efficient meeting. When people experience that they're well held, a meeting can do very different things because people aren't checking to make sure they're going to get out on time. People aren't thinking that you don't know what you're talking about. People aren't worried that you're wasting their time. How do you do that? It is important. Chit chat is important, and it can happen quickly. Like, hey, I love your scarf. Where did you get that? Thanks for letting me know. That sounds really cool. I can't wait to go wherever you went to get that. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting now. Is that okay? We've had a personal connection. And I think people worry that chit chat again has got some softness to it or somehow otherwise distracts. But checking in, having a little bit of conversation creates the possibility that people can come join in the meeting. So if you think of it as a bell curve, you have to bring people into the meeting. Then you need to tell them what you're doing. Why are we here? A quick synopsis of whatever it is that you're intending to get out of the meeting, a quick review of the agenda, or so the reason we're here is because we just had a client say that they're really unhappy about XYZ. I'd really like to come out of this meeting with 3 things that we can do to help them move forward. So-and-so has mentioned a concern about this. I think we should start here. And it just gets people feeling like people come into meetings scattered. We all come in with all the things we were doing 5 minutes before. Just set the table. Help them know what they're doing here. And then close well as best as you can. And again, closing, it would be awesome if closing could be a big, huge part of the meeting so that every person could say what they're leaving with, what their takeaway is, what their next action is. Sometimes that's not possible. But if you think about doing a full unit of work, what happens if you stop the unit of work before it's complete? So you have a whole circle, except you've got this much left, and everybody disperses. People feel left untethered. How do you help people create a whole experience? It can be super simple. I want everybody to go around and say what they're taking away. I want people to say in one word what they're taking away. I would love to have everybody share what their action plan is coming out of this meeting. I would love to know what everybody feels like we didn't get out of this meeting and we need to address next time, without opening up a new circle of work that you can't complete, but just being aware that part of that visceral experience of a meeting is giving it closure. And it helps people to then move on to the next thing that they're doing without staying back in the meeting with you, trying to mentally, or staying back in the meeting trying to figure out what the next thing is. So again, it's just a cadence, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour and a half. If you can touch on these things and hold them lightly as you're managing the meeting, it will help a lot.
I love that. I love that you have a conscious transition period. So whether it's just a short chit chat comment, but that you have this place for people to get it together and to focus, right? So, hey, I've acknowledged you as a human, and now I'm going to focus. You know, we're in this meeting. We're going to make this conscious transition to the meeting. Going to start the meeting. You give the frame for the meeting, right? Here's what I want to accomplish in this meeting, and then you kind of close the loop for everybody at the end so they know we've gotten to the end of this meeting and that it was worthwhile having the meeting, or as you said, we kind of acknowledge anything that we missed. And I think that's a pretty simple structure to follow, but it feels like, you like you said, it's not a complete unit of work if you haven't gone through all of those pieces, or each of the pieces won't be quite as productive or effective if you don't go through each of them in that order.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're also making me think, letting people know through the meeting what's going on. So if you've got 20 minutes left and you're pretty hot and heavy, you might say, we have 20 minutes left. And the person who really cares about ending the meeting on time is going to say, oh my gosh, thank you. In their heads, they're going to feel such a sense of relief. The people who tend to think of meetings as times to have big thoughts and big conversations, but not really get anything done, they just got told, we're going to kind of bring this in. So it just helps to kind of support all the different people, personalities, needs inside the context of the meeting, to let people know, you can trust me. I'm holding this meeting for you. I'm caring about the structure, and that will help us accomplish what we want to accomplish.
So at what point in your tenure at FH Perry did you start implementing, this conscious meeting structure, and what's been the impact on the business and the team?
It's funny that you ask that, because I don't know that I made it when I made it conscious, except for the awareness that I think I've always paid attention to that feeling or that vibe of what it is in a meeting, that when it's working and when it's not working, and my own frustrations in meetings that I'm not leading, that don't feel like they have something that's effective. It became more my willingness to say, this matters, as opposed to, I'm going to write this down and create a model, that I allowed myself to say, it matters how meetings are run. How people feel in meetings matters. This is something that comes naturally for me. I don't need to sort of shove that aside. I can actually make that sort of more of an explicit part of how I think about putting meetings together. And I think where it has really shown up is how thoughtful I want to be about longer company meetings. So we have an annual company day in January every year, full day, full team. That needs to be well run, well orchestrated, thought through, understood where the pitfalls are going to be. So because people need to feel like it has value. If you're going to ask me to take a day from my job site, it better have value. If we are going to come together as a team, we need to maximize what we can get out of that for the company culture. We need to accomplish something so it doesn't feel like we just came and talked and didn't do anything. Those days became so important that I actually call them, that I designed them. I designed those days. I create those days with so much thought about how one thing goes to the next. I had a teacher, someone I was teaching with once, talk to me about even the shift of, when are you asking people to work from their hearts and when are you asking them to work from their heads? And to be aware of when are the bouncing back and forth, and when can people tolerate it and not tolerate it. So it goes all the way down to what is the experience of being in the meeting, that I wanted to get really thoughtful about for everybody.
I guess, how has the impact of that manifested itself? And, has the team reacted? What's an example of how it's benefited the company doing it that way?
Yeah, well, because we haven't had any terrible meetings in the company, I don't know what the comparison would be, but
Do you
I'll
get
tell
compliments
you
from the team? Do
that
they
we have to
tell
ask
you
the team.
they're happy about it?
I would say when I know that it has worked is when I do on those big days, I really do take the time to do a closeout because I want to know what people got out of it. And I want people to know what they got out of it. And I want each person to know what everybody else got out of it. Because sometimes you think you've just had your own experience and that everybody else has had the same experience. And then someone across the room says, oh, I had this happen, or this moment when we talked about that, I realized XYZ. That has an impact. Like, oh, I didn't pay attention to that moment, but now that you say it, that was really profound too. So when people leave that circle, I think they might think I'm asking for kudos, but I'm actually asking for them to integrate and assimilate with what they've learned. And you hear things like, I got clarity on, we feel more connected as a team. I now understand a part of myself I didn't know I had before. When we did that role play, I really understood what it was like to be a salesperson. I didn't realize the impact that I can have as a project manager on the finances of the company. You hear back the things that people want to tell you are the most important takeaways for them. And to me, that's what makes that sort of profound shift.
That makes sense. And so you said, no bad meetings, but so is everyone at your company running meetings as well as you're running meetings? And how are you, I guess, how are you teaching or leading by example, or
Hopefully, mostly leading by example. We do try and incorporate it in. We definitely have bad meetings. I personally have bad meetings. Let me be very clear. But I think, how many people, we put a survey out at the beginning of the year and people said we have too many meetings. I am a person who can spend more time of my life in meetings than anything else because I get so energized by talking with people and ideas but I'm aware that meetings aren't the way everybody processes. And definitely, if you have to get stuff done, if you're the person who gets stuff done, sitting in a meeting doesn't feel like you're getting stuff done. So we're constantly paying attention to where's the effective meeting? How have we gotten too spread out or too far apart? What are we doing that's redundant in meetings? How can we bring meetings together? But I do want, the big piece is that very simple concept that I shared, which is connect with somebody, connect with the people that are in the room before you start, build trust, tell people what we're doing, and close well. And if we just keep practicing that kind of structure, I think we can have more effective meetings.
So we talked a little bit earlier about the example of the person that maybe doesn't speak a lot in meetings and why that is. So are there any like specific examples or exercises or things that you do in your meetings to, try to make sure that you're getting the input and the perspective and the discussion that you're looking for from kind of all the key participants? Or are there any fun icebreakers that you'd love to share that have been popular with the team?
Yeah. So I'll answer that question in sort of two different ways. One is, so why are icebreakers important? It's hard to go into a meeting, especially if you're not someone who thinks out loud. So if you're somebody who has to hear a question, have it go through the process,
Yep.
let it sink in, check it to make sure it's okay before you say something, make sure that what you want to say is what you want to say, right? And then there are the people who it just goes right into the feeling vibe, and I'm going to tell you exactly I don't care what comes out, I'll fix it later. I just had an idea I want to share. So as a facilitator, you're always needing to hold those types in balance. And there have been times where I will be running a meeting and no one says anything. I will say something thinking that I've just, given the most profound, brilliant question that everybody's going to want to respond to. And it's dead silence.
Crickets.
And I had to learn that that's because most people in that environment were people who need to process their answers, which is very different from being in a room full of people who da 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 da. So one is understanding that there are differences. Two is not being afraid of silence.
And
It's
do you just let
I
that
just let it
silence
sit.
speak?
It's okay. It is. Silence is a-okay. One, it gives people permission. It says to people, it's okay to think. It's okay to take your time. It's also inevitable that someone who may have something they want to say, if it's silent, it gives them space to say it. It creates opportunity. If that opportunity is not readily available for that person, I will keep track of who's talking most, or if there's somebody who hasn't been talking. And I might say something like, Liza, I'm aware that you're here and I know you're paying attention. So that's not what I'm calling out, but I am interested. It's not a requirement, but if you have something you want to share, I just want to create space for you to share it. Because sometimes the Liza has something that she's been trying to say for the last 10 minutes, but no one has given her the floor. So if I can create the space and have it okay to join in or not join in, and oftentimes that person will say, I don't really think I have anything to share, but this thought did come up, and then ba 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 ba, and it's the most brilliant thought that gets the conversation going in another direction. So it's being careful as the facilitator to realize that there's so much value there, and part of our job is to kind of create the space for somebody to take if they want to. That early icebreakers, what are icebreakers? It's a way to get everybody's voice in the room from the outset, so that group that's very comfortable talking all the time, they're not gonna have a problem getting their voice in the room. But I want the others to also have already had their voice in the room. And so if you do an icebreaker, that has some level of comfort to it and has some safety to it. Where again, trust is important, because as soon as you create distrust, you lose people. So I want to do something that feels like it's got some soft boundaries to it so that people will participate. And sometimes that's just because it's really short. You don't have to talk too much for too long, or you don't have to be too brilliant, and you can gauge the group. But that piece around, I will say, I just want to get everybody's voice in the room so that we're already here. That's why I think icebreakers are helpful.
Any specific ones you like most?
One I really like is, what's your weather report? What's your personal weather report? People get super clever. If people don't want to talk too much, they can say, I'm good, it's pretty sunny. And then we move on. Other people might tell you it's windy and blustery out, but this afternoon, I think it's going to calm down and be, people get very creative. But it's a really nice way to just sort of check in and say, hey, how am I? And what am I doing as I show up to this meeting? So I like that one a lot. Something we were talking about earlier too, that how everybody's coming in from the stuff that they've had 5 minutes before. That weather report icebreaker lets that stuff stay outside the room. Like, it was really blustery up till about 5 minutes ago, but now that I'm in here, I'm feeling much more like the sun just came out. Or that bluster is staying with me. And just by saying that, it creates the possibility that you might let it go.
It gives them a lot of room to share a little or a lot, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
type of thing that they want to share. That's nice. It sounds like you run meetings well, like kind of had a good approach to it from the start. How, has your leadership style evolved over the years, or is it, or what elements have evolved and what elements have stayed true to, where your head was at when you first started leading the company?
What popped into my head as you said it is that I've always been there. I've just gotten more comfortable with owning it. I don't think my style or what I care about or the way I show up has changed. I think it's only deepened as I have allowed it permission to show up. It has led me to hold a deep philosophy that leadership, it's never about becoming somebody else. We have so many models of so many different kinds of leaders, and it's so easy early in your career to say, to read all those books and to watch all those TED Talks and to hear how a company was massively successful and determine that you need to change your style to match that leadership. The trouble is it's not you and it's not authentic. So it's really hard to call on the resources that you need to call on to be able to show up that way. So much of my leadership training was doing a deep dive into who I am, what I care about, what my values are, how to really own those parts of myself as what I've got and turn them into something that's effective and actually just say, this is who I am. This is how I lead. This is what I care about. There are other things I absolutely and definitely cannot do. So how do I surround myself with that? That doesn't let you off the hook for times when, you can't just say, I don't like confrontation, so I'm not going to have confrontation. As a leader, you have to have confrontation. But how do I do it in a way that is really authentic to who I am? It doesn't mean I have to go in screaming. It means I have to go in and say, this is a really hard conversation we're about to have, but I need to have it. And I've learned that I'm the second, I'm going to have the hard conversation. What do I need to build up inside myself to be able to do that? And how do I run a good meeting or set the table so that it's effective for the person that I'm confronting or meeting with? Yeah, I think it's that. It's just the deepening and accepting and then using the best parts to their best ability.
I think that's amazing. I was going to sort of wrap up with the leadership, like one leadership lesson, but I have to say, I think that is it that resonates with me so much. And not just for me personally, but just with the coaching or mentoring conversations I've had with men and women alike over the course of my career. People worry that they don't fit into a particular leadership mold or a particular communication style or a particular personality type and worry about being effective. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, that it's really about creating the most high functioning version of yourself. I think maybe the way that I would describe it, which is, being able to lean into who you are and your style, like taking the things and you talked about this before, but taking the things that you do naturally and making those work really hard for you, and then also figuring out, how do I shore up the things that are me but that don't necessarily aren't as helpful in this in this journey or in whatever dynamic I have, so that you can build that most high functioning version of yourself as a leader. And I think you really nailed it, and I think you provide a really nice pathway for people who doubt or don't feel 100% confident, don't feel like things come naturally to them, that you don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to fake it either, right? You can really be your authentic self as a leader. Again, that doesn't mean you can walk away from the things that are challenging, but that there are ways to be high functioning versions of yourself that can be incredibly successful.
Yeah, and I will bet you that what people respond to you, what people say they like about you as a leader is the very thing that you like about yourself and the way you show up. And so your job as a leader is to hold aside the truths that you think are there and just spend time developing yourself as much as possible. So again, that's where awareness building, meditation, training, coaching, all those things, all those soft skills come into play to actually provide you with the best strategic path forward.
I love that. How do you create your best self, at least for that
Yeah.
work environment? I'm sure we can have a whole separate conversation about your personal your personal life and creating your best self there. But God, that was just fascinating, Allison. I so love
Okay.
your perspective on that. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. And I think, again, I think this is going to really resonate with a lot of folks who are, looking to be leaders and figuring out what does authenticity mean, and can it be done even if you don't fit into, the mold you see on TV or it's set out there for you.
Yeah, for sure. Good. I'm so glad because it means a lot to me, and any way I can get that message out there, I think it is the way to create goodness out there, people to be their best selves. Can you imagine if we had a world where people weren't hiding behind fear and worry and concern that they aren't enough?
It's hard. It's a kind of hard to imagine, right? I feel like we've built a whole industry around
100%, right? Yeah.
anxiety, but no, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's, I have kids, you have kids, I do think that there is definitely a lot of anxiety in this sort of next generation, and that this kind of approach is becoming more and more important, that they need to be able to see
Yeah.
that there's a way to not be perfect, but still be great.
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, it's all we've got. Like, I can't be something else. I just can't. It's just, but the more I understand what the operating system is for me, the better I can apply it and use it to the best of my ability. It just is. That's just the way it goes. So that's
I like the operating system, and I think that will resonate for the people who are less comfortable with the touchy-feely and a
yeah.
little bit better with the logic, but your operating system might be that
Yes,
logical approach.
absolutely.
Fine. Yep.
Yes, by the way, right, it doesn't mean that the only way is to be leading from your heart, or blah, 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 blah. Being you may be somebody who's very structured. You may be somebody who wants things done in a certain way, or, but so it's understanding how to increase your range on that.
Well, thank you again, Allison.
Thank you.
Folks will read The Leading
Oh,
with
this is
Heart
good.
and enjoy it as I am. Thank you again so much
Yeah.
for spending this time with us.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
This series is brought to you by House Pro. To learn more about our best-in-class software for winning clients, managing projects, and simplifying your workflow, visit house.com/pro.